Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jim, for your leadership in this area and your partnership and your friendship. So appreciate you, and good morning to both of our panelists here. I couldn't be more pleased to be here in the company of these two distinguished colleagues and to be with all of you to talk about this very important issue. Suicide is a complex issue, and as providers and case managers and nonprofit entities and leaders in your own right, we learn in lots of different ways. And I know over the years I've learned. We learn through classroom instruction, and we learn through textbooks, we learn through data, and we try to stay on top of the research. But I'm going to tell you, one of the best ways that we learn is just through listening to people who've been there and through lived experience. And so I think that you all are in for quite a learning experience this morning. Anyways, I'm a bit biased, but I think that's what we're in for. So our goal on this session is to learn everything that we can from these two distinguished panelists on the topic of suicide. It's a deeply personal issue in the VA. It's our top priority, and I think you'll probably hear more about that from Mr. Wilkie, so I'm not going to hit on that too much, but we know that it's the 10th leading cause of death in the nation. So it is a very serious issue, and it's not just a veteran issue, it's not just a service member issue, it's impacting youth, it's impacting elders, it's very, very serious issue. So I know that Jim shared a little bit about the background of both of our panelists, and so I think it's best if they share, but I can't tell you how impressed I am to have both of them here. General Mark Graham, the Director of Vets for Warriors, you'll hear more about his history, 35 years of serving active duty in the Army, all the way up through General Officer, so quite a long array of experiences. And I also want to recognize, although she's not here today, his wife Carol. Only reason I share this is because she's also done so much in this space over the last few years to raise awareness in the area of mental health and to just be such a strong advocate. So I thank Carol for that. I know she's not here and won't hear it, but please share my sentiments. And I also want Mr. Larkin to share more about his background in the Senate and all that he's done as the Sergeant at Arms of the Senate and also as a senior executive in the area of IEDs. And like I said, you all are in for a treat. So I thank you both for your service to our country and also for your mentorship and all that you're willing to do to help me and all of us in this space. It's unbelievable. I'm humbled. And so I want you to share your perspectives, and I want to stick with the conference theme, this idea of connecting, educating, advocating, and helping collaborate. Couldn't be a more suited theme, I think, Jim. So it's a difficult subject, and both of you lead by example. So I just want to get right into it, because I also want us to get to the point where we can have some questions from the crowd. So if we can start with you, Mark, if you could share a little bit about your background and what brings you to this topic, and just tell us.
Sure, thanks, Lita.
Yes.
Thanks for moderating, Frank. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Jim. And for all of you, thank you for what you do. I found out, and my wife and I learned about mental health in the worst possible way. On the morning of 21 June 2003, my wife, Carol, our daughter Melanie, and I, our life, and our son Jeff at the time, our life changed forever. As we were in Korea, got a phone call that our son Kevin died by suicide. And he killed himself in his apartment at the University of Kentucky. He was a high achiever, getting ready to be a senior ROTC cadet and be the cadet battalion commander. Kevin was studying to be an Army doctor. And Kevin was on depression medication. And I'll talk about that a little bit probably later. But he was on medication, but he came off the medication because he didn't want the Army or anyone to know. His brother and sister didn't even know he was on medication, and they lived in the same apartment. So Kevin died by suicide. 8 months later, our oldest son, Jeff, who was a University of Kentucky engineering graduate, now a second lieutenant of armor, deployed to Iraq and was killed by an IED on the 19th of February 2004, 8 months later. So our sons died fighting different battles. One was fighting a battle in his mind, and the other was fighting a battle with an enemy in a faraway land. So it just seems like yesterday, even though it's been over 15 years. Many mornings I wake up and still think this is a bad dream and somebody else's story. So I'll quickly tell you that our son Jeffrey, the night before he deployed, we were on the phone with him almost every day. The night before he deployed out of Fort Riley with the Big Red One, he called. We were talking. While we were on the phone, he said, "Hey, somebody's at my door, I've got to go." So my wife said, "Okay, Jeff." So we thought he was going to call right back. So 2-3 hours later, we went to bed. because we're old people. And around midnight, Jeff called back, crying, and my son Jeff didn't cry. I cried, but Jeff didn't really cry much. He was crying, and he said, Mom, he said, a soldier came to my door tonight, that's why I got off the phone. And the soldier said, hey man, are you the lieutenant whose brother killed himself? And Jeff said, yeah, I am. He said, I'm having those same feelings, can I talk with you? So Jeff invited him into his apartment. We don't know exactly what all they said, but he said this young guy did tell him that his father had taken his life, and this guy was having feelings, but all he ever wanted to do was be in the Army and serve. And Jeff told my wife and I, you know, before Kevin died, I would have said, hey man, let's go play basketball, let's go for a run, let's do a video game or something. He said, my mom, I talked to him about suicide, I talked to him about depression, and I told him, don't do like my brother did. Don't die. There's other ways to serve. So when Jeff called us that night, he said, Mom, promise me, because Carol and I had been out talking suicide prevention on college campuses at the time. He said, Mom, promise me that you and Dad won't stop doing this to help others. She said, I promise. And she said, I need to talk to Dad. So he asked me the same thing. He said, Dad, I need you to promise me. I said, I did. So that's the last time I ever talked to him in the United States. I talked to him once while he was in theater. So I'll do this until I end. And that's how I end up at Vets for Warriors. Because it's 24 hours a day, live phone calls. No matter when you call, we answer within 30 seconds. A veteran answers that phone to make sure that no one's alone. So thanks.
No, thank you so much. I heard while you were talking about your son, I was certainly listening, and I heard you say something about waking up in a bad dream, and right away I saw you nodding your head, and I think I've heard you, Frank, say that same expression as I've listened to you at other forums.
Yeah, I think part of the calculus, and thank you, Mark. Again, we're kind of in the same boat that we never wanted to be in. But you know, first of all, thanks, Jim, for bringing us together. And if you heard Clint speak last night, there's a very important thing that he said. For those that have chosen to depart by whatever means, that we're trying to desperately change right now. He says it's an obligation, essentially, on the rest of us that are still here to use what we have left to try to show them a different path. Because the calculus on the families that deal with this, as Mark said, does not go away. That pain, our hearts are ripped in half for the rest of our life. And that hole and what that's created is something that we live with every day, which I don't know that the vets, our loved ones, realized when they made that decision. And so this is part of the discussion that we have to have with those folks that are struggling right now. Even though they're so focused on themselves, there's a greater ripple effect that occurs when these things happen. My background, again, if you got the bio, if you came away with anything, I can't hold a job.
Great.
I just left the Senate. I'll be honest with you, I was a little frustrated trying to work on this issue, certainly right in front of them, and just a little frustrated with the lack of movement. So I decided to I chose to move to a new fighting position where I could advocate for warrior transition and also research into TBI. How I got here is my son, Navy SEAL, legacy, 10 years in the business as a combat medic, a sniper, and a preacher, 4 heavy combat tours, a number of other tours to lesser places, almost nonstop cycling into combat theater, started coming home manifesting signs of PTS, the biggest one, lack of sleep, and then the ebb and flow of anxiety and depression, becoming very impulsive, bursts of anger, all traits that were not part of his makeup. Something was changing. He had broken up with his relationship with his girlfriend after 5 years. Eventually got to the point, and alcohol was a big factor, trying to medicate over the counter. Eventually he sought help. That help only served to profile the fact that he was having trouble, and the system kind of, in an effort to try to help him with low-hanging fruit, almost when they found out that what they were doing wasn't working, turned on him and weaponized the situation against him, and then everything was about how fast they could get him out of the Navy. What is so counterintuitive to this is he was highly decorated, one of the top performing operators, who suddenly just went off the cliff and nobody stood back to say, what just happened here? He separated from the Navy, from the mental health ward out at the Naval Hospital San Diego. They discharged him from the mental health ward because of a crisis he was in. And I'll talk about what was behind that in a little bit. And discharged him from the Navy at the same time. He never got to go back to have closure with his teams. Spent a year outside of the Navy, trying to fight our way through the VA bureaucracy, getting help, assessments, care, and so forth. We wound up diverting him to some other treatment programs at great expense to ourselves that we found to be more effective than some of the programs we were finding in the VA, even though we found some folks in the VA to be very caring and genuine, but as frustrated with their own bureaucracy as we were trying to navigate through it. And then one morning, Sunday morning, April 23rd, 2017, we came home from an overnight trip and found that he had taken his life in the basement of our home. He was wearing his SEAL Team 7 t-shirt, which is the team that he had been with, dressed in red, white, and blue board shorts. He had illuminated a shadow box with his ribbons, patches, and other insignia, and had burned a hard drive with his deployment photos in the fireplace. We didn't see it coming. A year prior, we were alerted, we were on edge for something bad because he was in more of a crisis state. But, on this day, he, had just received a job offer. Things were looking up. He was back in school. He was still struggling, though, every day. He was still struggling. But it's a day that it just doesn't leave your mind. He said all along that something was wrong with his head, but nobody was listening. And they had 2 months before he took his life, had expressed to us that if anything happens to me, I want my body used for TBI research. I'm broken up inside. I'm not going to live long. And I need help, my boys.
Unbelievable that you're able to sit with us today, both of you, and share this in such a profound way to help us learn. I'm just thinking, I'm back where I started with wanting to thank you both for just being here and all of the risks that you described, Frank, like the alcohol or struggling with mental health and trying to navigate a complicated system that doesn't always work well. Were there other similar risks that you saw? I know, Mark, you spoke about depression. But were there other risks and or things that you thought were going well at the time? Equally so, Frank spoke about got a job, things were on track at one point.
Yeah, there were. And before I say that, I just want to say I know there are a lot of people out there that have lost someone to suicide. Excuse me, and you're connected in some way.
Yes.
And please know our condolences, our sympathies are with you. And you two are in a family that you never want to be in. But it's it's a loss. And I know many of you have lost comrades and friends and families in many ways, to include suicide. So there were risk factors. When Kevin was struggling, he had depression. The last phone call we had with him, we were in Korea. He talked to my wife, Carol, and he said, "Mom, my brain doesn't work anymore." Kevin was a straight A+ student, and always had been. We learned later that he was really more of a perfectionist than we ever knew. He was just selected to live in the German house at University of Kentucky because he spoke fluent German. He was selected to be the cadet battalion commander. He was selected to do all kinds of stuff. He was all kinds of high achievements. He was selected for airborne school the year before. He was selected to go to CTLT in Germany when he got back from the advanced camp. But the stigma is, to me, the number one factor. He didn't let his brother and sister know he was struggling. He didn't, no one, my wife and I knew he had depression, but I'll tell you, we knew he had depression, but we didn't know you could die from being sad. I knew he was sad, we both knew he was sad, but we didn't know you could die from being too sad at 15 years old. We've made some progress, but we clearly have not made enough progress. So we've got to eliminate the stigma. There are a lot of risk factors out there, but Kevin talked about things that he normally wouldn't talk about. His grades started to fall. When he said his brain didn't work, that should have been a red star cluster for us. Like, why would he say that? Frank said something, similar, you heard from your son, it's not, something's not right going on, right? So I think that's the key. And I think that the number one key is get him into care. And changing care providers was huge. Kevin was seeing someone at the clinic. That person went on summer hiatus, so he didn't want to go talk to the other person. He didn't want to switch. Now that person, of course, needs to get vacation. But I think that's something we need to look at, is the transition of care for folks is key.
Equally so, I know I had the opportunity to go to the Senate when you were there, Frank, and I remember very clearly our afternoon lunch and you sharing with me about this disjointed care system and people coming and going, and I think at that time you said, look, my son's very smart, he knows how to navigate this, but...
Yeah, again, I don't think I'm a complete idiot. So as I try to help him through some of the bureaucracy and navigate these pathways, my head was spinning. And it was like calling the IRS. Every time you called him, you got a different answer. But there were some very dedicated people trying to help. The point that Mark, with Ryan, very smart guy. All these SEALs are smart, they're type A. And one of the key things that happened as he got passed from his SEAL community's medical staff onto the bit larger Navy medical enterprise, a huge gap was created. The larger Navy medical enterprise didn't understand who they had, what their patient was all about, what made up that patient. These special operators, and I don't want to just focus on them, but they are a unique breed. They don't play like everybody else. They're wired differently. And if they're mishandled, or if in some way in providing care to them, that trust bond is broken, you will never get them back. You will now have a non-compliant patient, someone who is going to start working against you because they don't trust you, because you're sharing their information with people who shouldn't have that information. You're mischaracterizing their condition. In some cases, you're more fearful of the fact that they're a special operator than they are a regular person who's just trying to get help. And as I said, the system diverted towards what I would characterize as the low-hanging fruit. It was all about my son's alcohol use, which was just a symptom, just a way to medicate his pain and try to get away from what was haunting him every day. Believe me, his problem was not alcohol. I mentioned that he wished his brain or his body be used for research, and hopefully we'll get to talk about this a little bit further down the line. But about 2 months after, when Ryan passed that morning, I got a very courageous phone call from a wife of a SEAL who said, this happened to my husband. And we started talking, and our stories laid over one another. And she said, what I did is I was able to donate his brain for a TBI research program that was underway at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center that was looking at brain injury related to blast exposure. And about 2 months after that, we got a call results of that, and we can talk about
Yes.
that down the road. But to the point here, my son, he was basically treated like a mental health patient, like a psychiatric, unstable psychiatric risk. In the course of the 2 years we tried to rescue him, he was prescribed over 40 different medications, from over-the-counter to high-end psychotropics. So to Mark's point, you know, I got it, and I don't want to be irresponsible and say medications and pharmaceuticals are the evil, you know, twin of this, because there is some very appropriate application of these medications for some of these conditions. But I'm telling you, the system is so wedded to writing prescriptions instead of engaging in that dialogue, those connections that need to be made with these folks that are in distress, and to be able to listen to what's going on to them first before, you know, coming to judgment.
You know, I appreciate that. I want to talk more about the TBI piece. Certainly, I also don't want to miss, before we go too far, about the stigma piece.
Yeah.
And circling back to this, like, here you are, Mark, a well-established leader, and thinking through all that you know about the role of stigma during your military days, and the role of peers and or leaders. Is there something you would tell me or anybody in this room about, like, what can we do about stigma? Has the needle moved on this over the years? You know, equally, my father was in the Navy for 22 years, and he talks about the culture and how it was back then, and has it changed? And what would you tell us to do? And I'd also love to hear what you think about this too, Mark. Greg, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You can
thanks.
call me Mark.
So thanks, Keita, for that. So stigma is real. Like, my wife Carol and I were part of the stigma. I mean, we were part of the stigma. I couldn't sit up here and tell you about stigma if I didn't tell you that. We thought, our son? How could our son have depression? How could that be? He's a high achiever. He's doing all the, you know, he was all kinds of everything, you know. How can that be? Not our son. So there was some pride there. I mean, you know, he's a full scholarship student. I mean, so we were part of the stigma. We didn't get it. So I would offer, you think about some of the other issues we've had in our nation, and we've eliminated the stigma for getting care. And no one argues if you go to the medic. Nobody argues if you go to the doctor. Nobody argues if you go to the chaplain. Nobody says, I think if you go to the financial advisor, right? I mean, that's okay. But to go to the mental health specialist, whoa. So often when I speak, I tell people, if I tell you I'm on blood pressure medicine, does that bother you at all? Probably not. What if I told you I was on depression medication? Whoa. Would your reaction be different? Don't answer, don't raise your hand. But think about it. I mean, it's a cultural thing. And change is hard. We got to change the culture to where it's okay to go get help, to see a therapist, to see maybe you need maybe you need to be on medication, but maybe not. Maybe you just need some therapy, some help to get through what you're going through. So there's a real continuum there. So I think moving the bar is talking. Every one of you have a story. You're all here for a reason. You could be somewhere else today. But you've come to this great conference that Jim Lorraine and AWP set up for a chance to talk and discuss and connect so we can save lives each and every day. So we've got to continue the conversation. We've got to talk. We've got to stay in communities and make sure they know that there's help out there. And there's hope. And the hope for me is my daughter and my son-in-law, Melanie and Joe Quinn, and the 2 grandbabies they've got now. So I think we can, and you asked if we're moving the needle, we sure need to put the gas down harder and move it faster. Because right now, there's like a governor on the needle, and it's not moving that fast. And it needs to move faster because we're still losing too many to suicide.
Yes, absolutely. Frank, do you believe there's roles for peers and leaders on the stigma piece that you would share with us as well?
Yeah, absolutely, and Mark's spot on that. I mean, you know, what I saw, and as I talked to other folks that have been in this space, the labels that we hang on these folks are just like taking a knife and plunging it into their chest every time we hang a new label. Alcohol abuser, prescription drug abuser, opiate abuser, operationally unfit, you know, mental health risk, you know, all that. So when you have somebody who these high achievers, and and certainly, you know, as we look back, have a high sense of self-worth and dignity. And so they start struggling with some of these issues and they go looking for help. Systematically, their dignity is being disassembled. Chop by chop, every time we hang a label on it, goes to the stigma piece. There's a piece of this that I think kind of sets conditions for this to happen, and that's because a lot of our leadership have not been trained or educated into what's going on and how to deal with it. And very often defer to their medical resources for that guidance and counsel. And as I found out, a lot of the medical resources are kind of clueless about a lot of this. And you know, default towards, you know, what they're comfortable with. So a lot more has to be done in this space. And when we're talking about brain trauma, I mean, we're in the infancy of that right now. I'll hopefully talk about that shortly. But to Mark's point, absolutely, leadership is a key component of this at all levels. And being able to pick up on those telltales, being able to appropriately and respectfully get somebody into the system to the appropriate level of care and not separate them from their boys or their girls, their team. That is one of the biggest things that I've seen, is that the system almost defaults immediately to pulling them away from the people who they work every day with, who literally have become their surrogate family once they leave.
Both of you mentioned that we should be doing more and that we can do more, and I'm right there with you. I'm wondering what more we could do within the context of communities. Jim's brought us here, equally so, to talk about the role of communities. In the VA, we also have our suicide data, 20 veterans end their life a day. By suicide, 6 of them are seen in our VA hospital system in the days and months leading up to their death. 14 are not, but they're likely in communities. And so we have this push to really engage more in communities. What more could be done, whether about stigma or across the board? What would you share about communities?
Well, I mean, I'll start with Frank. I guess. I mean, I run Vet for Warriors, so I mean, I'm a pretty big fan of that. So, but a lot of great organizations out there. I think the key is connecting people, staying connected. I mean, our tagline is discover the power of connection, and it's for a reason, because until about probably 5 or 6 months ago, the number one reason people call, and we had 1,200 contacts a week, the number one reason people were calling was loneliness. They were feeling alone. And for someone to call a confidential peer line is tough anyway. So for them to make a call is hard. So the peers, and all of our peers have served, 75% of our combat veterans, but most of the time what they'll tell them is, hey, I'm glad you called, what's going on? Because they know it's hard to make that first phone call, then we follow up and call back. So I think staying connected. So if you've got folks in a program that you're running that's going well, you know, let's work together. You know, we can talk to them between visits, between events, or whatever you've got going, so that they know they can always talk to somebody, or somebody's going to give them a call. We got a couple of Vietnam era veterans we've been talking to for 2-3 years. We call them once a month, and they look forward to the call. And that's kind of, they just look forward to it. So whatever it takes to go the extra mile to help stay connected to those out there. And even if they're not in anymore, they're veterans, they might not be connected with their team anymore, their buddies, but they're part of a bigger organization. And that's, you know, they serve in our nation, they're a veteran, or a family member of a veteran, so they can stay connected. So I think the key is collaboration, working together, and making sure that we're all sharing resources and talking to each other. And I always laugh and say everybody's got the rice bowls, but we ought to make sure we're all the soy sauce in everybody's rice bowls. Right? We ought to just make sure we're all talking and working together.
Yeah.
Equally so, your community, what has been the impact of?
So I've joined this company, NS2 National Security Services, and one of the reasons I've joined is because they have a nonprofit, because the CEO, the president, and many of the executive staff are committed to veterans and helping veterans. It's a program that basically is trying to identify veterans in that transition space, whether they're getting out of the military or they're out within a 5-year window, and also Gold Star spouses. bringing them in, room and board, stipend, equipment, and we're trying to train them up in the disciplines that they can then port to the private public sector. So IT, finance, cyber defense, you name it. And the 4 years we've been doing it, probably about 250 veterans, men and women, that have been successfully trained. Every one of them has been placed into a job with an average salary of $70,000 to $80,000 with companies like Deloitte, Morgan Stanley, Amazon, others. And I've got some brochures, again, see me out in the lobby, because as Mark and I found out, and talking this morning, he says, hey, give me that information. I can push you some veterans for consideration. Because when you look at, if you can get them across this terrain of transition to a better place where they can provide for themselves, they feel comfortable, they've reestablished their sense of dignity and self-worth, it's amazing the calculus that has, because it goes even further when you consider the families and the community that these people are serving. And some of these people have been living out of their cars, jumping from shelters, from one shelter to another. But, I can tell you a story about one particular staff sergeant here in Atlanta, living out of a car with his family of 4, jumping from shelter to shelter, working part-time at McDonald's as a janitor just so he could bring food to his kids at night. Got into this program, and now he's got his house here in Atlanta. He's got his kids in a good school. It's a life changer. We're not the only effort out there, but to Mark's point, it's about connecting. It's about creating that fabric that, again, that we can support these vets, get them into some of these opportunities, and then not lose them, once they're in a better space, because we need to maintain that connection.
I so appreciate both of you all bringing this up, because there's this idea in the field of suicide prevention that says we need medical doctors for the solution, and we certainly do not get me wrong. But this idea that we clinicians are the ones that are going to be able to solve all of this as well, and this idea of peer support and all that you do at Vets for Warriors, this is unbelievable work that goes on there. And equally as important in some cases, I have heard from veterans myself have shared that is what saved their life. Being able to get on the phone with a peer. And so this is just so important for everybody to know in terms of it being a life-saving capability, and also employment. Employment is certainly about employment and getting a job and having a salary and all that we know that goes with employment, but also we meet friends where we work, and that connects the isolation and the idea that it also provides us health care. And it also provides us a sense of purpose and a mission, and you belong where you work, and hopefully in a good environment. And so these are things that also are part of the equation. So I want to get to 2 more questions before we also hear from the group. One, I want to talk more about TBI, and then I'd like to hear what else you might have to say about the research going on. Are there gold nuggets from the research that you think are tracking in the right direction? Are there gaps? Are there things we should know more about the research? We're going to hear also another session, I think, at 10. It's going to talk about the Operation Deep Dive research. But can we start with the TBI piece and then...
Okay, very quickly, because I know we're up against time, is that for the 2 months following my son's death, we were called into Walter Reed to get results of his brain study. And what they told us is they found that he was significantly brain injured from blast exposure, a newly discovered microscopic level of brain injury that my fear is could explain a lot of the neuropsychological, the physiological signs and symptoms we're seeing in a lot of our vets that have trained for combat using explosives and weapon systems that give off concussive effects, and then the effects of combat itself. It's at the microscopic level. Unfortunately, we cannot see it in a living person right now, much like the CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy that you hear about with the NFL. I will say there are 2 distinctive patterns of injury. They are not the same. At some point, again, with research, we may be able to see whether they merge especially as a person gets older. But right now, we are at great risk with our ground forces, in the fact that we have no ability to image or leverage high confidence blood markers that point towards this microscopic level of injury. When you consider the blast wave that goes through the brain at the speed of sound, it is hitting all sectors of the brain. Your frontal lobe with your executive functions, which then can explain the damage there, can explain a lot of what you're seeing with the anxiety, the depression, the impulsivity, the hypothalamus with sleep depression, with sleep aberrancies, and also hormonal changes. So again, this is a level of research that needs to be amplified, very much focused on, and again, we need to find out what's going on, and we're just starting out on this path.
But one of the most powerful things I remember you sharing with me before about the TBI that I thought was most striking was, don't always believe what you get back on the first screen.
Right.
And so multiple screens that were coming back negative.
So we're encouraging a baseline program right now, which before someone goes into combat operations or trains for combat, be able to get their physical, medical, and mental health baseline, so that as they come back from deployments or some type of crises, that you can reflect against that baseline.
And then that would put us in a better place, obviously.
But a big part of this is driving medical technology to develop the imaging capabilities, and certainly the biomarkers that can help us, detect this early in the evolution of this.
Okay. Just want to make sure that got out to everybody. Good. Anything you would share, Mark, about the research or things you've heard over the years that you think would be?
I think Frank's with the TBI. I know research is a key component of this, just like it is any other thing going on in the nation that's causing challenges. And so I think the research is key. It takes all the components. Research is certainly one of the big ones we need to continue to do.
And the specific pattern of brain injury may very well be a significant nexus to the suicides that we see. But again, we just don't know, because we have to advance the research.
Okay, well, this first question from the group might loop back to the research, so I'll be curious to what you all think about this. We have a question about social media. It's, do we think that social media has a negative impact on this epidemic, or do you think that social media is resulting in more social isolation and the interaction between Facebook and spending time with friends and all that we know with this new and upcoming generation? I'm particularly also curious about this because when we look at our data in the VA, we see our highest rate of suicide is among 18 to 34-year-olds when we look at it by rate. And so I don't know, this generation that grew up, the social media generation, do either of you have a take on this?
No, I mean, I shouldn't say no. I do have a take on it. I'm on social media too, so. But this debate could be another 2-3 sessions, and Jim, I'm sure that we use social media. I know at Vets for Warriors, and we've had several people contact us through Vets for Warriors that we've then contacted by phone and talked to and connected them and got them resources and things that have helped them. So I think there's some real goodness in social media to help get the word out and everything. I think sometimes we blame social media for isolation more than it has to be blamed. I mean, it's not that somebody's making us use the social media, but I do think people need to, I know I need to do it. I look at Facebook once a day, then I stop. I mean, I just don't stay on all the time, but that's just me because I'm old. I think it's important, and I think it's not going to go away. I mean, it's going to keep here. We're going to keep it around, right? It's going to continue to grow, I think. So I think we got to be careful to not just separate it and say that's part of it. Is a part of it? Could be. But I think it's also a way to stay connected. I mean, it's a way some people, through groups and other things to stay connected. So I think it's a real balance with social media.
I think that one thing I would also share about it is that we've learned through some research with Dr. Craig Bryant out at the University of Utah that some veterans and service members are actually writing their risks online. I know that Vets for Warriors has been able to help people when they went online and put some of their risks and said they feel lonely or that they're drinking too much. I think as a community we should pay attention when people put those risks out there. I don't think they're attention seeking.
Exactly.
So, okay, we have another question, and I mentioned earlier about the 18 to 34-year-olds. This is a question about another data set, a group of high-risk people, and that is men over the age of 50. And we have a lot of veterans, again, near and dear question to me, over the age of 50. We have more of them in this population, so our raw numbers also point towards higher rates for this group. We talk in the field, you hear the term a lot of upstream interventions, or sometimes on the DoD I used to hear the term left of boom, like we have to move our interventions left of the crisis. This is a question that's asking, what is the best way to connect and support people way left of their decision to end their life? That's Chris Ford, who's in our crowd here somewhere.
I mean, I'll definitely dive on that. I mean, we even say in our materials upstream.
Okay.
Veterans Crisis Line is important. We need to have it. They've got a lot of resources. We, Vets for Wearers, we work with them. We have a monthly call with them. We warm transfer calls to them if it's a crisis call. But clearly, Vets for Wearers, we're not a crisis line. We're a peer support line that helps connect you to resources. Then we stay connected to you with peer support. So our premise is let's get in front of this. Let's not wait until you're at the point of crisis to make a phone call. Contact us. Get on the web and come through a live chat on the web. Send us an email. Let's talk. And then if you are in crisis, then we'll work with the Veterans Crisis Line, who has many more resources than we do to help you. So I do think it is early on, but that's part of the stigma. You've got to be willing to reach out or tell a buddy, hey, because I always hand out, when I give you cards, I usually give you two. And I always say, one for you and one for you to hand out, because you might not need it, but maybe someone else does. Knowing that, that person I'm handing it to might very well need it, but they won't admit it. So I think it's key that we make sure we keep people connected and get in front of it. Let's talk early on. Whether it's housing, finance, whatever you're going through, relationships, whatever you're going through, talk early on. And with somebody who can help connect you.
It sounds like you're describing like a way of life, though. Sort of live your life in a way that you embrace others, and that it's always okay that someone approaches you, and that it's just sort of a way of living, which I think is hard to explain to folks that actually saves lives.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's kind of like tribe, right?
Right.
Be part of the tribe. I mean,
yes.
And trust. Trust is the big one. You got to trust.
Yeah.
Trust.
Frank, let me ask you about battle buddies. I know the Navy SEAL community is rich in this peer support, everyday, SEAL to SEAL, Marine to Marine, knee to knee kind of mentality. We have a question about battle buddies, but it's a different type of question though. The question has to do with how do we best support a battle buddy who might have lost somebody to suicide? So, and if you're willing to share, have Ryan's friends reached you, and what does their support look like?
That's a great question. They're very much moved by, he was, again, a revered operator within his group. As one person put, this is the SEAL that we wanted to be. He's the guy that we looked up to. He's the guy that made us who we are. If this happened to him, if they could do this to him, what does it mean for the rest of us? I'm not so sure. I think the community with Ryan's story has taken a hard look at itself, but a lot of it distills down to culture, and culture within the ranks, culture within leadership of, are you going to create an environment where, again, these folks have raised their right hand, stood up on the line, and done things for this nation, done the tough jobs, and come home hurt and broken. Are we going to use that against them and treat them like a piece of broken equipment and toss them out? Or are we going to help them? Are we going to stay true to our commitment and not leaving anybody behind? And that means that we're in it for the long haul. And I think that when these folks, they don't understand what's going on, what's changing in their body, they're not getting good answers. As things get weaponized against them, then they build this level of distrust and they get more and more distant. With Ryan, and I'm sure with these others, key factors, they were separated from their boys. They had the labels hung onto them that stripped them of their dignity. They knew that they weren't going to be able to go back to do what they loved to do, what they were good at. And then eventually they felt that they were a burden onto their families and that they were failures. And that's not who these people started out being. So what happened?
I think it's such a good question because I also just want us to remember to continue to support people that know someone who lost someone. Because, I mean, the research tells us that those battle buddies are now at risk.
High risk. Yeah.
Yes. So I just say we get our arms around any way we can. So it's such a good question.
And to that point, 2 people on his team have since taken their life in the past year.
Wow.
Whether it's related to Ryan's story or not, but 2 people within his team dynamic have taken their life in the past year.
And so for like all of us in this room, you know somebody that has been a part of an intimate circle that has lost somebody, like, just keep them close. Keep them real close to us. Yeah, let's support them every way we can. Yeah. There is a final question here that I want to ask about something I think that you sort of hit too, Mark, on normalizing mental health and that it being okay. And you used your example where if you're on blood pressure medication, is that okay? I was in the Pentagon yesterday morning at an event. You know, September is Suicide Prevention Month. And we had a kickoff event, many of which you've probably given keynotes for back in the day. And there was a guest speaker that talked about hand washing, and that was her example. And how as a nation, you know, we have prevented so many diseases with this simple act of like washing our hands. And again, it resonated with me for more reasons than one. I'll have to tell you after the presentation, but hand washing as a simple event of normalizing. Is there something else we can do to normalize mental health, particularly regarding depression and other diagnoses, so that people will be more likely to go in and get care?
That's a great question, and you know, and I wish I had the magic answer for that. I don't, but I think one is continuing the conversation. And people say, "Yeah, you've got to talk about it." I mean, and I'll bring up breast cancer. You know, years ago we never talked about cancer much because we didn't know a lot about it. We certainly didn't talk about breast cancer. And now you see pink baseball bats, pink golf clubs, pink shoes, pink gloves.
Baseball players wear pink.
Everything. And so, and certainly we've not solved it, but I think we've reduced the social stigma of going in early for detection, getting care, and research. I think we've made a change in people's lives because we've helped eliminate the social stigma of cancer or breast cancer or getting checked early. So I think the same thing happens. You've got to continue to raise awareness and keep the conversation going so that eventually you start to normalize it. It's okay to go see someone in mental health. That's okay. Just like the doctor that, you know, I'm talking about mind, body, spirit. And I say, you know, in the Army, I would say, you know, body, we work physical training all the time. We've got medical doctors, you know, so if you're hurting everything. Spirit, we've got chaplains in every unit. Where's the mind part? Where's the mental health person in every unit? And I know the Army's, I know the military's working on that, and you know, we're certainly part of that. So I think we're making progress on that, but we need to keep it going. It's okay to say something. It's a sign of strength, not weakness, to seek help.
Do you have something else?
Oh yeah. So
I'm reading some body language here too, Greg. I want you to.
yeah, you can tell. So I spoke at a conference last October out in San Diego that Navy SEAL Foundation puts on an impact forum where I told Ryan's story. And in the audience was one of his licensed clinical social workers who dealt with him while he was hospitalized in the mental health ward in the last month of his naval service and didn't realize that he had taken his life. And she approached me absolutely emotional and subsequently wrote a blog for the Huffington Post, basically calling out her own hospital administration and the psychiatric Department of Psychiatry at the hospital for how they mishandled him and the sense that he shouldn't have even been on that board. The reason he was on that board, as I came to find out later, is that they, one, were scared that he was a Navy SEAL, and they felt that the only way to kind of, you know, deal with somebody with that type of training and was to lock him up. Well, when they locked him up on the mental health ward, you know, my son was an avid shooter. Guns come away. He now has that on his record that impacts his security clearance. You know, when he applies for a job, he's got to list that. That's going to follow throughout, you know, his life. And to Mark's point, it's the stigma of getting mental health assistance, but yet inappropriate and the system, you know, being balanced in how it deals with it. And again, I use the term weaponizing these labels against these individuals. Because I'm telling you, my own observation, this is one of the key criteria or factors that took my son down. I mean, all along he knew that he had a problem with his brain. He was the only one that was consistent about that. Nobody else was listening, including me. I bear that guilt. And come to find out that, you know, he was the one that was right. So, again, I think that we need to change the narrative. We absolutely need to change the narrative on this.
And it begins with a conversation. And everyday conversations, not just at panels, not just at conferences, not just at events during the month of September, but every day in pairs of 2 and 3, everywhere, yeah. Well, I thank you to America's Warrior Partnership and to all of you this morning for participating in our panel, and in particular to our guests, our distinguished guests. I'm so inspired and humbled by both of you and your willingness to do this. I so appreciate you both. I hope that we were able to connect and to educate and to advocate and to collaborate consistent with the theme here for America's Warrior Partnership. And so if you all can help me with a warm round of applause.